Hi, I'm Dean.
And I'm Krista.
She's the daughter.
He's the dad.
And together we are Family Plot.
So put on your adventure hat.
And join us as we take you on an adventure.
Through strange true history.
Weird true crime.
And all things paranormal.
I'm ready. I have my hat on.
It doesn't matter, Dad. No one can see us.
You're breaking the fourth wall.
Family Plot, available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
And most other pod listening apps.
Hello and welcome to A Killer Podcast. I'm Freya Millard.
And I'm Amy Woodcock and we are your hosts.
If you're new here, then let us just say welcome and thanks for stopping by. We hope you stay forever.
For a little background on us, we are non-biological twins who have been crime obsessed for as long as we have known each other, which is a hell of a long time.
It sure is, Amy.
We're talking over 20 years now.
Oh,
and
we're so
only 24.
We're so old.
You can do the maths.
Each season of A Killer Podcast, we pick a theme and then get all fixated on crimes that come into that criteria. So last season it was supernatural crimes, but this season,
dun dun dun,
it is murder for money.
Yes, we are talking about the most extravagant and crazy ways that people tried to kill each other for some extra cash. We can promise you right now that the cases we're talking about this season are going to blow your mind. You won't believe the things people will do for the green stuff. So stick with us for absolutely wild 10 episodes.
Woo! Right, first things first though, can we just talk about the glow up that we have had since last season?
Oh guys, it's amazing.
I mean, when we recorded Supernatural Crimes, we were holed up in this cardboard box. Literally a cardboard box. And now look at us, breathing fresh air.
There's so much space.
It's amazing. What is this outside world? I think when you start anything new, you're just never sure whether it's worth investing your time and your money and your effort. But since we released the first season and we found out that we'd reached, a consistent 3 to 5 listeners.
That's a pretty solid number.
Yeah, we were like, wow, we're practically famous now. We better start acting like it.
It's gone to our heads, honestly.
It is. Time to invest.
So, our setup has had a glow up. As you can tell, the sound quality, well, that's just a delight now.
Hopefully.
We even have these foam boxes to put the mics inside instead of boxing ourselves in with duvets and pillows. It's all very fancy round here.
We feel like queens.
We've even gone as extra as to frame our podcast artwork and fan mail we've sent ourselves to really inspire us as we go.
Gotta do it for the fans.
Us.
So yeah, thanks for joining and hopefully you stay put for the next 10 episodes. And to kick it all off, it's my turn and I'm going to open with what is probably the most well-known case of the season. We do try to add a little familiarity in there so that we can hook you in before we blow your mind.
It's all a plan.
So yes, today's story is that of George Joseph Smith. If you know it, hopefully we can tell you some stuff that you haven't heard before. And if you don't, then that's perfect. Let's just get stuck in then.
I don't think I really know anything, so I'm excited to hear this.
Ooh, I feel like I thought the same thing, and then when I started to research it, it came back, and I was like, oh, this is quite...
the name rings a bell. But...
Yeah, we'll see if I trigger any memories at any point. Okay, so my story begins on the 13th of July in 1912.
A while ago.
It was a while ago. Over 100 years. Although, in my head, I'm still in 2012, so...
An extra 8 years since then.
I stopped when the world stopped. It was at this beautiful English seaside town of Herne Bay in Kent. The body of 33-year-old Bessie Williams was discovered inside her home at number 80 on the High Street, which would be 159 now, so if you live there.
Oh, go find it.
She lived here with her husband, Henry Williams, a picture restorer from London, whom she had only married a few months earlier after they met in Bristol.
Dodgy, that's all I'm going to say.
Bessie's body was found in the bathtub, and at the inquest, Dr. Frank French stated that Bessie had suffered an epileptic fit in the bath, and that the cause of her death had been asphyxiation by drowning. When pressed on whether anything else could be a factor in her death, Dr. French insisted there was no reason to suspect anything other than drowning.
Okay, I'll believe him for now.
And apparently his word alone was good enough because no post-mortem was carried out, and the jury at the inquest came back with the verdict of death by misadventure. I'd never heard the word death by misadventure before. Sounds really exciting.
I mean, yeah, sure.
It's not how I would describe an epileptic drowning fit, but...
how did they even come to the conclusion without doing a post-mortem?
Well,
question.
Different times, but death by misadventure and you're just having a bath.
Oh, she was an adventurous one, this lady. Taking a bath.
If that's not on my death report, I'm going to be really upset. Death by misadventure, took a nap.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. French's report, alongside the police's questioning of her husband Henry Williams, led to him being ruled out as a suspect, despite the fact that just 5 days before her death, Bessie had made a will, which meant in the event of her death, her husband Henry would gain the full inheritance from her late father.
Well, maybe it was just a coincidence.
It was £2,579, 13 shillings and 7 pence, which would be about 150,000 today.
I mean, it's an alright amount. I'd take it.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't say no. In time, the police and Dr. French would come to regret their decision to make a quick dismissal of the odd death, especially when more information came to light about Henry Williams, who was actually just an alias for serial killer George Joseph Smith.
Bum bum bum.
The reveal. Come on, we are still low budget, like we're still making our own music.
We haven't made it that high up yet.
Come on, guys. It turns out that in the short time that they had been together, George/Henry had convinced Bessie to move away from her previous home on King's Road to a much fancier place on the high street. Upon arrival, George deemed the lack of a bathtub unacceptable.
I mean, same.
So 7 weeks before Bessie's death, he went to the shop and asked about the price of a cast iron bath and was told it would cost £2. Oof, that's a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
A few days later, he sent Bessie to the same store to haggle a 2 shilling discount, completely unaware that she was purchasing the instrument that facilitated in her death. The couple had the bathtub installed in their spare room. Around the same time, Henry, but George, it gets very confusing with his aliases.
Henry George.
George took Bessie to Dr. French after she complained of headaches and instead managed to convince Bessie herself and the doctor that she suffered from fits that resulted in her becoming unconscious. Then wouldn't you know it, on July the 13th, one of those fits just so happened to occur while she was enjoying the new bathtub. At least that's what George told everyone. On the day before her death, George actually woke Dr. French up with a phone call telling him that his wife was having another one of her fits. The doctor went to check on her and said he would be back the following morning for another checkup. However, when he came back the morning of July the 13th, he was shocked to find out from George that Bessie had drowned.
He really planned this out.
He witnessed her body in the tub with her head underwater and her legs stretched out straight, like her feet popping out of the water. According to Dr. French, there was no evidence of violence, and so, as we know, he attributes her death to an epileptic fit. Despite having inherited Bessie's family's fortune, George did not want to spend much honouring his wife. Instead, he chose the cheapest coffin, and he had her buried in a common grave instead of paying for a private plot.
Oh, he sounds like a charming man.
The cherry on top of his cheap ways is that he actually had the callous to return the bathtub and gain a full refund.
Oh my god, that's awful.
After getting off with Bessie's murder scot-free, George vanished from Herne Bay, only to reappear again in Southsea, Portsmouth. And this time, he had his eyes on a new bride, or should I say, prize.
Ooh.
He married 25-year-old nurse Alice Burnham, soon to become Alice Smith, on November 4th, 1913. Funnily enough, on their actual wedding day, George took Alice to attain a £500 life insurance policy because I guess there's just no time to waste.
Well, I mean, if I got married and then my husband was like, on the same day, oh, let's go get some like life insurance out, I'd be like, nah.
Binning you.
Nah, I'm out of here.
Yeah, that dude's gonna kill you.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, you dead.
I'm not up with this.
Alice's dad did not get very good vibes from George, and during their engagement he described George as being of very evil appearance. He was just not keen on the idea of his little girl getting locked down in with this guy. But unfortunately, despite his warnings, the marriage still went ahead and Alice's fate was sealed. On the evening of December the 12th, 1913, the couple were staying at the apartment of Mr. and Mrs. Crossley during their trip to Blackpool for their belated honeymoon. George's idea, of course.
Did they have a bath by any chance?
Don't spoil the story! As soon as they arrived in Blackpool, George took Alice to see a doctor about her headaches.
Oh, he likes a good headache story.
And then 3 days later, Alice went to take a bath in the apartment they were staying at. Dun dun dun.
Oh, this is really ruining baths for me.
Yeah, it does ruin it. Wait till the end.
I want to have a nice bath.
Just as Mrs. Crossley, the landlady, noticed droplets forming on the ceiling, George Smith turned up and distracted her and conveniently gives himself an alibi. Shortly after, he went upstairs and, discovered, like quotation marks, discovered.
Because you can't see them, but they are happening.
Yeah. Alice's body in the bathtub, probably put on a performance of a lifetime at this point.
Yeah.
Despite her head being at the foot of the bath, it was noted that there was no signs of suspicion, and as the inquest went ahead the next day, the verdict was returned that Alice had accidentally drowned through heart failure.
Did they do an autopsy on this one?
No, I don't think they did.
They're just making it up as they go along, I swear.
Mhm. But wouldn't you know it, since Alice had insured her life for £500, guess who would get to cash it all in and then run off into the sunset again?
Good old George.
Exactly,
Oh,
Amy.
I'm so good at this.
Then just over a year later, George would strike again, although this time his name was John Lloyd. His next wife was 38-year-old Margaret Elizabeth Lloyd, a lovely woman by all accounts and the daughter of a vicar. On their wedding day, the 18th of December 1914, the couple were staying at a boarding house at 14 Bismarck Road in Highgate, London. Just that afternoon, good old Margaret had visited her solicitor in Islington to adjust her will.
Wow.
It's the sign.
Whoa, it's happening.
Ensuring that her new husband would benefit financially if anything were to ever happen to it. Well, almost as if it's a bad omen to change your will, Margaret would not have to wait long for that bad thing to happen.
Oh, God.
Clearly, George/John had started to get a little impatient between his murderous spree, and so that very evening, he took his new bride to the doctors to address her new headaches.
I suppose back in the day there wouldn't be much talk between
Police forces.
Yeah.
And also, he is changing his identity.
and like every time he gets married. Oh, his new wife has a headache.
It's all in different locations.
Yeah, dodgy.
It is very dodgy how that he keeps going with the same system, but
Yeah.
if it ain't broke.
It obviously wasn't.
So yes, where was I? So that very evening, he took his new bride to the doctors to address her new headaches, and then straight back home so she could have a nice, relaxing bath. Get in the tub, love.
When you think they're being nice,
Yeah, they try and kill you.
he's gonna kill you.
He told the owner of the house, Louisa Blanche, that he was going to quickly nip out to pick up some tomatoes for his wife's supper whilst she was pampering. Such a lovely husband.
What a joyous man.
Except when he returned, you wouldn't believe it, but Margaret never made it out of the bathtub.
I didn't see that one coming.
No, shocking. After calling out for her several times, George burst in the room to find her dead in the bathtub. Deja vu.
I just found her this way.
Then, the trustee inquiry came through one last time for George, and on the 1st of January 1915, it was declared that Margaret had experienced an accidental death. At this point in his murderous career, it appeared George was getting quite bored of the formalities, as he told the undertaker at Margaret's funeral to get it over with quickly.
He just doesn't even give a shit anymore, does he?
And afterwards it was reported that he was heard to have said, "Thank goodness that's all over."
Oh my god.
God, I hate having to go to my wife's funerals all the time.
Jesus, another one, fuck's sake.
The first person to finally throw a spanner in the works for George Smith was Joseph Crossley, the former homeowner of the place where George and his wife Alice had lived and where she had died. On January 3rd, 1915, Joseph Crossley sent the Metropolitan Police 2 enclosed newspaper cuttings that reported on the death of Margaret Lloyd and Alice Smith.
I'm glad someone's looking out, you know.
Finally, clogged it. Between Mr. Crossley, his wife, and Alice's father, Charles Burnham, the 3 amateur detectives made the connection that both deaths were eerily similar, basically doing the police's job for them.
Yeah.
Thankfully, someone at the police force was keen to wake up and smell the coffee, and so Divisional Detective Inspector Neil, so very big mouthful,
That was good.
began by visiting 14 Bismarck Road, the place where Margaret Lloyd and her husband John Lloyd, who was actually George Smith, lived until she died. Upon investigation, Inspector Neil found out from the landlady that George had examined the bathtub first before deciding whether the couple would take the room.
It's got to be a certain type of bath then, I guess.
Or it has to have a bath.
Just have a bath.
Additionally, the inspector noticed that the bathtub was 50 inches long and 66 inches at the top, so relatively small. This raised suspicions for Inspector Neil, who had doubts as to whether a grown woman like Margaret would have been able to drown in such a small tub, especially given that the water was only 3/4 full when she was found.
Well, at least someone's thinking.
Finally. He then took the investigation directly to Dr. Bates, the coroner who examined Margaret. He asked whether there were any signs of violence on her body, and Dr. Bates said there was nothing except for a tiny bruise above the elbow. However, he did notice was that her husband, John, aka George, lacked any signs of grief, and even ordered the cheapest coffin for Margaret.
Such a cheapskate.
As he kept digging, more and more red flags started appearing, including the fact that not only had Margaret had a will made on the day she died, but that it was just 3 hours before.
It's not dodgy at all.
No.
Honestly.
Within the new will, she had declared her loving husband George as the sole beneficiary. In addition, George had withdrawn all of Margaret's savings on the day of her death too.
Yeah, he's really not, trying to hide this, is he? Yeah.
He don't care.
Honestly.
It was at this point that the Yorkshire Insurance Company had started doing their own investigation into Margaret's death, because they found it bizarre timing that she'd taken out a £700 policy on her life 3 days before she was married to John Lloyd.
I'll do that all the time.
Immediately, the inspector started collecting more information on Alice Smith's financial activity before her untimely demise to see if there was any similarities. And wouldn't you know it, she had also taken out a life insurance policy and a will shortly before her death, which made her husband the sole beneficiary. And similarly, Mr. and Mrs. Crossley said that they had only took up lodging after Mr. Smith had examined the bathroom. At this point, Inspector Neil was convinced that it was the same man in both murders, so he wanted to find out where George's whereabouts were. The inspector had the bright idea of asking the Yorkshire Insurance Company to issue a favourable report that would entice George to come out and collect the money. The insurance office was watched day and night, waiting for the cash-hungry man to collect his reward. On the 1st of February, 1915, someone matching Lloyd Smith's description, like Lloyd/Smith, appeared at the office on Uxbridge Road in London, where Detective Neil was ready to apprehend him. When confronted about his dual identities, George initially denied it. However, once Neil told him he would be taken in for questioning in regards to bigamy, George admitted that he was indeed both men. Of course, that was probably because he would rather have got done for bigamy than serial murder.
Yeah, as you do.
He was like, yeah, okay, fine, I married multiple women.
Oh, slap my hand.
Yeah, naughty me.
Naughty me.
After George Joseph Smith's arrest for bigamy and murder, the pathologist Bernard Splinsbury, which is a great name.
That is a great name.
Was called to assist. And our man, Bernard, was like a big deal. Back then, he was like the Home Office pathologist.
Oh, fancy.
A big shot. First up, he was asked to determine how Margaret and Alice had died. They exhumed Margaret's body for closer inspection, and Bernard confirmed the tiny bruises above the elbow, as noted by Dr. Bates in the initial post-mortem, as well as 2 microscopic marks. He also noticed that there were no signs of heart or circulatory disease. There was not extensive evidence of drowning, which suggested the death was almost instantaneous.
So, really, if they'd done a proper, thorough autopsy to begin with, they might have seen this.
Exactly. So what he found was that it looked as if Margaret had died from a sudden stroke, not drowning, and not heart disease as they listed.
Yeah.
This led to the suggestion that they should perform some experiments in the very same bathtub which Margaret and Alice died in, to try and work out exactly how it all went down. The press quickly got wind of the whole thing, and the case started to get widely reported on, even all the way down in Kent.
Ooh. Throwback.
This is when the chief of police at Herney's Bay caught on and thought, hey, that sounds really familiar. We had a bathtub drowning a little while ago. He made the connection to Bessie Williams and got in touch with Inspector Neil to see if there was another murder to consider. And indeed there was. It was at this point that the police could finally confirm that Henry Williams, George Lloyd, and George Smith were all the same person, George Joseph Smith.
They got you.
But now they got to figure out how. How did it go down? So, after inspecting Bessie's body, Bernard, the big shot pathologist, confirmed the drowning, stating that there was the presence of goosebumps on the skin, and they sent the bathtub down to the police station in London for more experiments. Now, this is when shit gets wild, if it isn't already.
I'm excited.
So the way these women died had the team of investigators pretty stumped. The forensics evidence just wasn't adding up with how they could have died accidentally or by murder. Bernard started by testing out the theories of accidental drownings, because of course you have to check every possibility.
Absolutely.
And for all they know, this guy could really have just been the most unfortunate husband in the world.
Just very unlucky.
Yeah.
You just need to stop buying baths.
Yeah. 3 wives die in bathtubs and you didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, sure.
The problem was the victim's measurements and the bathtub sizes were just not adding up. For example, if Bessie Williams had experienced an epileptic fit, then her entire body would have initially stiffened up and extended out, which would have resulted in her upper part of her body being pushed further out of the water.
Yeah.
It would almost have guaranteed that her face would have been well above the water levels. Then her limbs would have started to violently spasm, which again would have further flung her out, making it very difficult for someone her size to get underwater in that tub. To test out the theory of murder, the team hired several experienced female divers that matched the build of the victims.
Ooh.
They tried to force them underwater, but it only demonstrated to them the signs of a physical struggle.
Yeah.
And that was missing from the scene and the victims' bodies, so this ruled it out. Then, when glancing back over the notes from Bessie's murder and about how she'd been found with her feet in the air, Bernard was hit with an idea and had come up with a theory about how George was killing his wives. He suggested that their beloved husband would enter the room and stand at the end of the bathtub, perhaps with a ruse about offering up a foot rub or something. Then, while the women were relaxing, George would unexpectedly yank their feet upwards towards him, instantly pulling their head underneath the water, flooding their nose and throat with water, and that would cause them to suddenly lose consciousness.
Ooh.
This explains the lack of physical injuries, because if there was a struggle, there would have been more bruising.
Yeah.
And then the fact that there was minimal signs of drowning To test out the theory, one lovely diver who matched Bessie's description was laying in the tub when unexpectedly Inspector Neil yanked her feet upwards, causing her head to go straight under the water. Panic struck him when the inspector noticed that the assistant was no longer moving.
Oh, God. Yeah, maybe they should have thought about that beforehand.
I think they just wanted to see, does this work?
But then if they knew it might have possibly caused death of 3 women, and then they're just like, let's just try it out on one of these divers.
Well, here we go. They immediately pull her out of the water and try to revive her.
Oh, God.
Over half an hour went by before they were finally able to bring her back to life.
Oh, so she didn't die.
No.
She survived.
Well, she did die, but she survived.
She came back.
But that's how effective it was. It killed them almost instantly.
Yeah.
When the diver came to, she explained that the only thing she remembered was the rush of water before it went black. So even the fact she expected the attack and was an experienced diver had no benefits to her in that situation, showing just how little chance George's wives had to survive
I
him.
hope that she got some compensation.
I mean, she died on the job.
Exactly. She should get a little bit of something. Like,
I can't imagine being the inspector.
Like, oh, shit.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, can we try this experiment? And then someone dies, you're just like, oh, shit.
Anything for the forensics, guys. Anything for the forensics.
Dedicated to the cause.
Exactly.
On June the 22nd, 1915, George Joseph Smith went to trial at the Old Bailey and was tried for the murder of Bessie Williams. The murders of Alice Smith and Margaret Lloyd were used as evidence to establish a pattern of his crimes. This was significant because this was the first case where similarities between connected crimes were used to prove liberation, which is now widely used, making this trial a big deal in the forensic pathology scene.
We like that.
These cases then became notoriously known as the Brides in the Bath, and on July the 1st, after just 20 minutes of deliberation, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. George was sentenced to death, and on August the 13th of that year, he met his own grisly fate and was executed at Maidstone Gaol Prison, although he always maintained that he was innocent, even at the end.
Sure, George, sure.
It wasn't me, it just happened to me 3 times.
Somehow a ghost did it. It's a ghost. The ghost pulled the legs.
I tried to stop him. To let you know a bit more about who George was, let's tell you a bit about his disturbing past and his bigamous ways. George was born on January 11th, 1872, in Bethnal Green in London. At the early age of 9, this kid was sent to a reformatory, which is basically like an alternative to prison for young offenders.
Oh, jeez. Started off young.
As a young adult, George continued to get into trouble, and in 1896, he was imprisoned for a sentence of 12 months for persuading a woman to steal from her employer. It turns out George was a fella who enjoyed a good wedding. Kind of like Ross from Friends, but a lot more sinister. Lucky for George, his reign of terror fell into an era where women outnumbered men by more than 500,000 in 1910.
Yes, queen.
Because so many men had immigrated to the colonies. Although that just sound nice. There was a frenzy about unmarried women in the media at the time, and a lot of pressure was put on the women to get off the market, which I guess helped George out.
They were desperate for that wedding.
Yeah. Well, society put pressure on them.
Yeah.
They took any psycho, including George. When George was 19 years old, he married Caroline Beatrice Thornhill in Leicester in 1898, under the alias Oliver George Love.
He does like an alias.
The couple moved to London when Caroline worked as a maid for numerous employees. To make her money-hungry husband happy, Caroline began stealing from her employers, but she was eventually caught and sentenced to 12 months in prison. Once she was released, she incriminated George, who was then in prison for 2 years in January 1901. When he was released, Caroline fled to Canada, and George conveniently went back to his other wife.
Oh my god.
He had more than one.
Surprise!
It was another woman that he'd married a year after he had initially married Caroline. Immediately, he cleared her out of her savings and left.
He loves a bit of money, doesn't he?
He does.
He's all about the money.
He's all about the money. I mean, what's the series about?
Money.
For money. We need a theme song. Dun, dun, dun. George would spend his time prowling around for vulnerable-looking females that he could take advantage of. The Daily Mail published an article in 2010 which quoted a woman who had the unfortunate pleasure of meeting George, and she said, "When he looked at you, had the feeling that you were being magnetised. They were little eyes that seemed to rob you of your will." Ooh. That's something to say.
That's creepy.
About meeting someone that makes you feel creeped out, but I get that.
Yeah.
That's just men everywhere. In 1908, George had a really busy year. In June, he married Florence Wilson, a widower from Worthing, but by July, he had decided that he was done with that.
I'm done with this.
He took the equivalent of £3,000 from her savings and sold her belongings before leaving. He's a nice guy.
He's such a great guy.
Then, at the end of the very same month, on the 30th of July, George married Edith Pelger in Bristol.
He has had a lot of wives.
Interestingly, George seemed to have a fondness for Edith, above his many other wives.
Oh.
Because although he would disappear for months at a time just to casually marry someone else, kill them, and then come back,
As you do.
He would come back to Edith between his marriages with the money that he had made. In October 1909, Smith married Sarah Freeman under the name George Rose Smith and repeated his pattern of robbing his wife of everything before up and leaving again. Then, as we already know, in 1910 he was married again, but this time to Bessie Munday, who would become his first fatality. In total, George Joseph Smith entered into 7 different bigamous marriages between the years of 1908 to 1914.
Those earlier wives must feel so lucky
Yeah.
that they didn't become one of his victims in that way.
Yeah, just took the money and left. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because he obviously had an escalation. Was it about money?
Yeah, he could have just kept doing the whole taking the money and leaving. He didn't have to go to killing, so it must be something deeper inside him.
Clearly, George was a manipulative, calculated man who had one set agenda, and that was money. He treated his wives like money banks and only saw them as a source of income instead of living beings. There are many theories as to how George gained control over these women, not just physically in the moment of their deaths, but also mentally and financially. It takes a strong manipulator and emotional abuser to convince someone that they are suffering from illnesses they are not experiencing.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Like, you'd think you'd know if you had headaches or not.
Yeah. And to even hand over everything they'd own financially to a man that they'd met less than a few months ago.
Yeah.
Gotta be good at what he does. One of the most outlandish theories is that George Joseph Smith was an experienced hypnotist who hypnotized his victims into submission during the last few months of their lives and during their drowning, whereas others believe he scared his wives into submission with violence and more common domestic abuse tactics. But I guess ultimately, what is known now is all the answers we will ever find out on this case, since those who know the truth are long gone.
It is a long time since then.
Been a long time. And that is the case of George Joseph Smith.
Ooh, that was a good one.
Yeah.
He was very money obsessed.
I think it fit the profile for the
Definitely.
theme very well.
So everyone should take from that, be very aware of who you're marrying, okay? Don't do your life insurance straight after.
Yeah, if someone's like, hey honey, on our wedding day, can I get a life insurance policy on you? Fuck off!
Just be like, nah, I'm good.
Get out. They're gonna kill you.
They're gonna get you.
That's all they want. Yeah, it definitely has made me paranoid.
Yeah, gotta keep an eye on them.
What you should do is become worth nothing, and then
you won't get killed for your money.
Honestly,
that's the plan.
Rich people have it really hard.
Who would want to be rich, honestly?
Okay, guys, so now it's time for our burning questions segment. This season, we're going to make sure we stick with it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it kind of dwindled out last season, but...
It burned out. Wow. But not this time. The fire is hot. The questions are hot. We're going to keep it going. So, on this segment, we ask each other one forensic and one social science-based question.
So I asked Freya a social sciencey-based question, and she asked me a forensic question based on our academic backgrounds.
Yeah. So, Amy, would you like me to ask you one first?
Go ahead.
Oh, by the way, the questions are kind of like based on something that's happened in the episode that we just spoke about, but the other person doesn't know what the story is. We just tell them the question and they've got to go find out about that. Okay, so my question for you, what happens to the body when someone is yanked by their feet underwater?
So one thing I found about when you get a sudden rush of water to the head, because that's what I've kind of based my answer on.
Yeah.
So there's one thing called vagal inhibition, which is known for causing sudden deaths by sudden rushes of water to the head. So this is based on the vagus nerve. It's a cranial nerve that connects to the control of the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. It is the longest nerve in the autonomic nervous system.
Wow.
So how this works is when the rush of water goes down the throat, so I imagine it could enter up through the nose, the mouth. This would put pressure on the vagus nerve as it is located down through the neck. This pressure would affect the control of the heart and therefore can slow the heart rate down, causing you to instantly faint. Fainting occurs as there will not be enough blood flow to the brain and therefore not enough oxygen. Another thing that can occur from a slowed heart rate is blood can pool in your heart chambers, causing heart failure.
Oh, okay. So when Margaret's death and they thought it was heart-based, maybe is it...
There could be
the symptoms.
Something to do with that, yeah. One thing is that not all people will die from this, which I suppose is shown by they got that one lady back to life, and they can recover. So I've had a look at some other cases where vagal inhibition has sort of been looked at, and it does show that minimal force placed on the neck of a person, a force that you wouldn't expect to cause death, such as maybe like a light punch, if you're like playing about and you hit someone in the neck, this can also lead to sudden death.
Wow.
So it's quite dangerous, really. It's quite scary.
Oh no, that's frightening as hell.
Yeah. So you got to be careful, guys. Try not to attack people on the neck and stuff.
Don't go punching necks.
Yeah. So in these cases, the determination of a cause of death by vagal inhibition can only occur by ruling out all other possibilities of death because there's no major signs or symptoms, which would be like how they didn't see any bruising or anything because it doesn't really show anything. So the only way that they can say that's the cause of death is by saying, well, there's literally no other way that we can see it happening.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
That makes sense why they couldn't really understand immediately how he was killing them then.
Yeah, because there's no, like, outwardly signs.
Yeah.
So that's what I found.
I feel like this is like the soft spot all over again for babies. It freaks me out the idea that there's just a spot on your body that...
If it gets, like, whacked in a certain way, it's over for you guys.
That's it. I'm going to be wearing turtlenecks forever. Padded turtlenecks forever. I'm going to be in summer sweating through a turtleneck.
Keep that neck protected, guys. And your nose and your mouth and anything that can lead to your throat. Just keep it real safe.
That was really interesting. When I read up on it, I was very much like, well, how does that physically work? Like, why does that happen when he was doing that?
It was definitely very interesting to read up on. Like, I hadn't heard of it before. And I found it, very interesting.
Wow, we hope you've learned something new with us.
Yes. So now I'm going to ask Freya her question. Are you ready?
Yes.
So, could someone be hypnotised into drowning?
So, it's widely agreed by experts that hypnotism cannot make someone do something against their will, and that this sort of assumption that hypnotism is a form of mind control is actually just like a Hollywood version of hypnotism.
Ah, okay.
So, board-certified hypnotist John Mongonville, I can't say his name, I'm going to try again. John Mongonville. We'll go with that.
Close enough.
We'll go with that. Says, hypnotism is a state of consent and cooperation. The only control the hypnotist therapist has over you is the control you allow him to have. You are capable of making normal decisions at all times under hypnosis.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you can't be made to do anything under hypnosis that you wouldn't find objectionable under normal circumstances.
That's crazy. I always thought they could make you do whatever you wanted.
Yeah, so it's like a state of suggestibility. Yeah. But it isn't a state of control, and I think that's what Hollywood has kind of turned us into.
So overall, you can make your own choice on it.
Yes. They aren't in your brain suddenly controlling your...
Yeah.
But it's like that version, it sounds more exciting, doesn't it? The idea that you've got full control over someone by hypnotising them, but it's not real. Well, I have got something that I thought I'd bring up because it's a case I found. So the general consensus is no, you can't hypnotise anyone into doing anything they don't want to, including drowning. But that being said, I did find a really interesting case, and it was on the Guardian website from 2015 about the death of 3 students in Florida.
Ooh.
They all died within weeks of each other. 1 was killed in a car accident and 2 killed themselves via suicide. But the parents of all 3 alleged that their deaths were the result of hypnotism being performed by the principal and self-appointed mind healer, George Kenny.
That's interesting. Okay.
And very recent as well.
Yeah.
Now, Kenny was an unlicensed amateur practitioner who had studied hypnotism online. The 3 students had sought out Kenny's help with individual problems and had agreed to subject themselves to hypnotism. He was said to have hypnotised at least 75 students and staff over a 5-year period.
Wow.
And he was told to stop 3 times from the school board, and he hadn't.
So professional.
Yeah. The attorneys who represented the families of the victims said that he altered the underdeveloped brains of teenagers, and they all ended up dead because of it. Interestingly, though, Kenny took a plea deal and only served a year probation on a misdemeanor charge of practicing hypnotism without a license.
Wow.
And the case never went to trial in terms of a murder charge, but instead the settlement was made outside of the courts. The school lawyer hired hypnotherapist and psychotherapist Dr. Ellen Gamberg to offer a rebuttal to the family's claims that the hypnotism techniques Kenny had taught the student were the contributors to their death. In reference to the student that died by car accident, she said, "One of the hallmarks for putting yourself into self-hypnosis is to enter a very relaxed state of attention and focus, and I think that would be extremely impossible while driving a car."
Okay.
So that's both sides of that case.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking it was like, how did they fit that in with the car accident?
Yeah, the student that died by the car accident, his girlfriend was in the car with him, and she said that he went into a really relaxed state, and then they had the accident.
Right, okay.
They were sort of saying, like, that's actually kind of contradicts how hypnotism works.
Yeah.
That if you were that relaxed, you wouldn't be driving a car. To get into that relaxed state, you have to be not thinking about anything.
Yeah, you can't be driving and relaxing.
Yeah. I definitely can.
Yeah, definitely. I get that.
So yes, although the case offers a more recent example of deaths that potentially involve hypnotism, I think the lack of criminal charges just shows there probably isn't really a scientific basis to prove that the hypnotism played a role here.
Yeah.
And the same can be said for the brides and the bathtub murders. I think the settlement, the financial settlement, I would view it as the school board accepting guilt more like a PR stunt, because
Yeah.
there is obviously some evidence of wrongdoing since the principal was told to
Exactly.
stop doing it 3 times and
He's
didn't.
still doing it.
Yeah, so they probably had to do that settlement because they have messed up.
They didn't want to look bad.
Yeah, he wasn't putting their student welfare first, so that's why they probably settled. So that's what I found on it as a recent example.
Well, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about hypnosis. I thought it was, I guess, like
Control.
I said, like the Hollywood version.
Yeah, well, I've been hypnotised before. Were you there, weren't you? My Dan Stepman's party.
Yeah.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
So I've been hypnotised twice in my life. When I was researching this as well, because everyone thinks that those who get hypnotised, it's because they are like have less willpower, very suggestible.
Easily influenced.
Yeah. But they said actually the people that are best to hypnotise when I was researching this are people who are creative and highly intelligent. So I was
like seeing, yeah.
I mean, I take
You're
what I
going
want.
for that one, aren't you?
I definitely.
You'll take that one.
But apparently it's actually good and like open-minded. So, because obviously that's what they need for you to be suggestible. And it's if you're closed-minded and like, oh, I'm not going to be hypnotised, then you won't.
You probably, because you're saying you won't let it happen to you.
So I think the case was that if you are open to like letting someone try and hypnotise you and relaxing.
That makes sense for what you've explained of what it is, Because
when I was being hypnotised, it felt very much like a relaxed state, and I was sort of not in a trance or anything. I would say I was just very relaxed.
You were very relaxed, yeah.
And I was open to following his suggestions because
she would do anything.
not anything. But I just thought this was like a party trick, it was just to, I think it was like a card game, wasn't it, or something? So it was just a bit of fun, and I thought I was open-minded enough to be like, okay, yeah, I'll have a bit of fun with this.
I'll give it a go.
I'm going to listen to your words, listen to your voice, take it in and see how it works. And it did work, like I was hypnotised. But I don't think if he was like, okay, now go drown yourself. Well,
You'd
no.
be like, excuse me, no. No.
I don't feel like I was out of control at all.
You wouldn't have.
I couldn't just suddenly get up and start behaving like a monkey or something like, woo.
I mean, that would have been amazing.
You guys would have loved it.
Yeah.
So I think from my own experience, I kind of believe this more.
Yeah.
It isn't really what people think it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's our burning questions, guys.
Yes, I hope you guys learned something interesting from that today.
We do try to educate and tell shit stories. Not shit stories, to speak shit.
We're educating ourselves at the same time, honestly.
Yeah, this is for us. Right?
Yeah.
You guys are listening?
Like,
hey, get out of here.
What are you doing here?
No, stay.
Come back.
So yeah, end of episode 1 here. We'll be back next week with episode 2.
Where I'll be telling a story.
So you definitely don't want to miss that one.
No, because I'm amazing.
And in the meantime, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at A Killer Podcast.
Or on Instagram, also at A Killer Podcast.
And on Facebook, and you never guess where? At A Killer Podcast. We're everywhere.
Yes.
And you can find our episodes on every podcast streaming platform ever.
We have a link tree, so you can go on there and find whichever preference of site you use, and hopefully we should be on them. We should be on them.
We are everywhere now, so find us.
We're taking over the world. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode.
And have a killer week. Goodbye.
Bye. You can find a full list of our resources used to create this episode at our website, witworld.co.uk/podcast.
That's witworld.co.uk.